Camryn Justice, one of the anchors on a TV station in Cleveland, Ohio, she was there with Shedeur Sanders when he was giving his youth camp. And she also mentioned that Shedeur and the Cleveland Browns, they came together and gave this youth camp. So when you look back and check out what Shedeur Sanders did over the weekend, it was a lot, y'all. This dude.
He touched a kid's shoulder and told him, "I love you." 20 minutes later, he was gone, vanished, like he was never even there. And 2 days after that, a Cleveland news anchor was standing in front of a camera telling a story that nobody expected to blow up the way it did. This is the story of a quarterback who keeps showing up when nobody's forcing him to. Because here's the thing about Shedeur Sanders. Everybody wants to talk about the 5th round. Everybody wants to talk about the slide, but almost nobody wants to talk about what he was doing the same weekend the rest of the league was resting. He was in Miami, grinding, throwing routes with Deshaun Watson, building chemistry with Jerry Jeudy and Casey Concepcion, and a handful of teammates who didn't have to be there either. No cameras forced them into that gym. No coach mandated it. They chose it. And Shedeur was right in the middle of it, treating an off-season Saturday like it was already week 1 of the regular season. Think about what that says. This is a guy sitting behind other quarterbacks on the depth chart, at least on paper, and instead of resting on a beach somewhere like half the league does in June, he's organizing throwing sessions with his skill players, building timing, building trust, not because a coach told him to, because he wants it more than the label everyone stuck on him. Then the weather turned on him. Flights got delayed again. And instead of staying in Florida, resting up like most players would have done, he paid out of his own pocket for a private jet just to make it back to Cleveland in time to keep a promise to 500 kids he'd never met. Let that sit for a second. A guy the entire league loves to underestimate spent his own money to not let a bunch of children down. And that's exactly where this story starts. Camryn Justice, a reporter out of Cleveland, was standing on that field at Brooklyn Memorial Stadium when it happened. Kids everywhere, families everywhere, Browns gear as far as the camera could pan. And right in the middle of it, Shedeur Sanders, fresh off a flight, running on no sleep, no excuses, running drills with kids who idolize him like he's already a legend in this city.
He made a new track and released it. He flew to Miami to work out with Deshaun Watson, Jerry Jeudy, along with Casey Concepcion and some more of his teammates. Then he took a private jet. The reason why he had to take a private jet, because of the bad weather, he had a flight delayed several times. So that he could make the event, he spent his own money to fly back.
She caught it on camera. The smiles, the energy, the moment one lucky kid won a diamond chain during a game of Simon Says and looked like he just won the Super Bowl. Shedeur laughing, saying it was just something funny thought of, something to give these kids a memory they'd never forget. But here's what made the moment hit different. It wasn't staged. It wasn't a photo op his team set up for good press. He said it himself. Being an athlete can be isolating. You get put on a pedestal, then people forget you're still just a person who wants connection. This camp wasn't about optics. It was about him needing that moment just as much as those kids did. Think about that for a second. A guy getting hammered on national television every single week. A guy whose name gets dragged through debate shows like it's a punching bag. And the thing he says makes him happiest isn't a highlight, isn't a big throw, isn't a win. It's the sky, the music, the merch, the parents standing in the back watching their kids smile. That's what he called the best part of his day. And that's when the story started spreading beyond just Cleveland, because people started asking the real question. Why does a guy getting hammered every single week by talk shows and draft analysts keep showing up like this? Because make no mistake, the noise around Shedeur hasn't stopped, not for 1 week since April. Every talking head with a microphone has an opinion. Some say he's overhyped, some say Daddy's name got him more attention than his tape deserved. Some say a fifth-round pick shouldn't be talked about like a franchise quarterback. For months, that narrative just sat there, unchallenged, repeating itself on loop until it almost became accepted as fact instead of opinion. And that's the part that stings the most for people who actually watched his college tape. Because the numbers were there, the wins were there, the clutch moments were there. But instead of talking about production, the conversation kept circling back to everything except football, as if that erased what he did with a ball in his hand. But something's shifting, and it's not because Shedeur clapped back on social media or went on a podcast trying to defend himself. It's because he didn't say a word.
On Saturday, Browns quarterback Shedeur Sanders was in Miami, Florida, working out with some other members of the Cleveland Browns. One day later, though, he's back here in Northeast Ohio, holding a youth football camp for more than 500 kids here at Brooklyn Memorial Stadium.
Just the first one, so this is an amazing start. You know, it's an amazing start. Everybody's healthy. The gear that they have on look good. And everybody's out here smiling, so that's what it's about.
Sanders' camp, held in collaboration with Browns Give Back, brought out hundreds of kids to participate in skills.
While everyone else was talking about him, he was in Cleveland with a playbook in his hands and a phone glued to his ear, on calls with his coaching staff the moment mandatory minicamp ended. Not a break, not a vacation. Film, reps, preparation. People close to the program have said he's been locked in from day one, grinding through the iPad, breaking down plays, building the kind of habits that don't show up on a stat sheet, but show up in October and November when quarterbacks either rise or get exposed. And then there's this. He flew a kid out from Florida, on his own dime again, just to train with him in Cleveland. Not for clout, not for cameras, because he wanted somebody in his corner who pushes him, somebody who won't let him get comfortable during the one part of the year most players use to relax. That's not the profile of a guy who's satisfied being a backup story. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the outside perspective on Shedeur isn't just coming from critics anymore. It's starting to come from the players who were drafted in the exact same class, guys who had every reason to stay quiet instead of putting their name behind his. Cam Ward, the #1 overall pick in that same draft, was asked directly about Shedeur's slide. And what he said wasn't the polite, safe answer people expected. He said flat out, if we're talking about pure talent and play, Shedeur should have been picked a lot higher. He talked about the relationship he built with Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, during the pre-draft process. Said there were literal group FaceTime calls, comparing notes, trying to figure out who the front office valued most. And even Cam Ward, the guy who went #1, admitted Shedeur belonged in that same tier of quarterbacks. Think about how rare that is. The #1 pick in a draft class, with every incentive to stay quiet about a rival quarterback, instead going out of his way to say the slide didn't make sense. That's not politics. That's a guy who watched the tape and knows talent when he sees it. Then he said something that hit even harder. It's not about where you get drafted, it's about what you do once you're on the field. Because nobody remembers your draft slot once you start making plays. They remember whether you can be trusted with the season. That's not just respect, that's a warning shot to every team that passed on him 5 times.
At the end of the day, if you talk about play, it should have been up there. But I think, everything happens for a reason, I had a good relationship with Andrew Berry, the GM for the Browns. He had a great relationship with him as well. And there was times during the pre-draft process that, both of us, we would get on group FaceTime calls with him just to, see who he really liked the most. But I know he's in a great position. He's going to get a chance to play some good football this year. And like I told him, I continue to tell myself, it's not really.
And that leads to the real tension of this whole story. The quarterback competition in Cleveland heading into training camp. Because it's not really Shedeur versus Deshaun Watson on paper. It's Shedeur versus the perception that he hasn't earned it yet. It's Shedeur versus a front office that has to decide who gives them the best chance to beat Jacksonville in week 1. It's Shedeur versus a locker room that's watching every single rep in camp, deciding for themselves who they trust behind center when the season's actually on the line. And that's the part nobody talks about enough. It's not just about coaches believing you, it's about your teammates believing you. The guys who have to trust you're going to put them in the right position on 3rd and long, in the 2-minute drill, in the moments that decide seasons. That trust doesn't come from a highlight reel. It comes from months of exactly what Shedeur's been doing, grinding quietly, while everyone else assumes he's still just the storyline from draft night. And you can already see pieces of that trust building. Jerry Jeudy choosing to train with him, Casey Concepcion linking up in Miami. These aren't mandated team activities. These are teammates choosing to spend their own time with a guy they believe is worth investing in. Chemistry like that gets built in June, not in September when the games actually start counting. So when people ask why a 5th-round pick is getting this much attention heading into camp, the answer is simple. It's because he refuses to act like a 5th-round pick. He shows up to a youth camp less than 24 hours after training with his teammates in another state. He pays his own way to keep a promise. He spends his off time bringing in extra help instead of relaxing. He stays glued to his playbook the second the team breaks for the summer. That's the separation, not talk, repetition. And through all of it, the doubt, the criticism, the 5th-round label people won't let go of, Shedeur has said something that tells you exactly how he's built mentally. He doesn't watch the noise. He's barely on social media. Post, then log off. Because the second you start consuming everything people say about you, it becomes poison. And poison spreads if you let it stay in your head too long.
What Shedeur Sanders have done and accomplished over this past week and since he's been in Cleveland. He done a lot, giving back to the community, being there for his teammates, and also steady working on his craft to be a franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. That's dope. That's dope. It is. Salute to Shedeur Sanders. Continue to work on the craft. Much success, and I just believe everything that you...
That's a mindset most people twice his age haven't figured out yet. If you're feeling this story the way we are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more coming with this Shedeur Sanders journey, and you're not going to want to miss it. But there's a deeper layer to Shedeur that this story keeps circling back to, and it's not about football at all. It's about loyalty. Because in a moment that felt more personal than anything about football, Shedeur opened up about relationships, about who actually shows up for you versus who just talks about showing up. He said it plainly. Everybody's going to have ups and downs, but it's about who you can actually lean on. A lot of people will post support online. Very few will pick up the phone and actually be there when things get hard. And you can feel exactly where that's coming from, because during the hardest stretch of his life, the draft slide, the criticism, the doubt, there were people who stayed silent, people who let the noise do the talking for them instead of standing beside him. Some of those people, according to what he hinted at, were even profiting off the criticism, talking down on him publicly while never once reaching out privately. And that's the part he says he respects the least. Not disagreement, not honest criticism, but people using his struggles as content, as a paycheck, while offering nothing behind the scenes. But Shedeur made it clear, he's not the kind of person who talks down on somebody just because it benefits him. Even people who never supported him, even people who let him fall when it mattered most, he said he could never do that. And more importantly, he said something that should make every single person who doubted him a little uneasy. When that person rises to the top, they're always going to remember. That's not a threat. That's not bitterness. That's the quiet confidence of somebody who already knows how this story ends. Because here's where it gets real for Cleveland. Training camp is 2 weeks away. Every rep is about to matter. Every practice, every scrimmage, every decision from that coaching staff is going to shape a quarterback competition the entire league is watching closely. And right now, the storyline isn't about talent. Everybody already agrees Shedeur has that. The storyline is about trust. Can the coaching staff trust him with the offense? Can the locker room trust him with the season? Can this city trust him with a franchise that's been starving for stability at the most important position in football for years now? Cleveland's had a long history at quarterback that fans would rather forget. Names that came and went, promises that never turned into consistency. And every fan watching this quarterback competition understands what's really at stake here isn't just week 1 against Jacksonville. It's whether this franchise finally finds the guy who sticks around for a decade instead of 2 seasons. Camryn Justice's report wasn't really about a youth camp. It was a window into who Shedeur Sanders actually is when nobody's forcing him to perform. Giving back on his own dime, showing up exhausted because he made a promise he intended to keep, smiling with kids who see him as bigger than football, while the football world outside that stadium kept arguing about whether he even deserves a chance to prove himself. And Cam Ward's comments weren't just respect from a fellow rookie, they were confirmation. Even the guy picked number 1 overall sees something in Shedeur that the draft process failed to reflect. Something buried under name recognition and outside noise instead of tape. So as training camp approaches and Jacksonville looms in week 1, the questions keep stacking. Does Todd Monken trust him enough to start? Do his teammates believe in him enough to rally behind him without hesitation? Does this city believe in him enough to give him the runway he needs to actually become what everyone privately suspects he could be? Because if the last few weeks have shown anything, it's this. Shedeur Sanders isn't waiting for permission to be great. He's already acting like it, flying across states to prepare when nobody's watching, giving back before he's even locked down QB1, building loyalty in a locker room before a single preseason snap has even been played. The doubt is still out there. The criticism isn't going away overnight, and it probably shouldn't. Pressure is what separates the guys who fold from the guys who become legends. But something is shifting in Cleveland, something you can feel in these small moments more than any stat line could ever show. And when the pads finally come on in 2 weeks, we're going to find out if all of this, the work, the loyalty, the mindset, the quiet grind nobody was forced to see, finally gets the stage it deserves. Shedeur Sanders isn't asking to be believed in anymore. He's making it impossible not to.